Well, this is Dateline News and Conversation. It's Thursday, the 16th of April, 2026. We're coming to you live from Yalta in the Crimea. Not going to waste any time getting started. My guest tonight is somebody you all know, Peter Kuznick. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be with you, Regis. As I was mentioning before, it's hard to believe how much worse the world has gotten since the last time I saw you. We always think we've reached the lowest possible point, when in reality, it gets worse each time, more dangerous, more deranged, more diluted, more violent. And I guess that there's some minimally good news, right? The Israelis and the Lebanese say they've reached a ceasefire agreement, although Hezbollah hasn't weighed in yet. And uh, we sort of have a ceasefire in Iran, with Iran and the U.S. and Israel. To call that a ceasefire stretches the meaning of the term a little bit.
Well, Peter, we're going to talk about this and a lot of other things tonight. But I want to start with how bad I think it is. And I did just get a report a little while ago that Israel and Lebanon had agreed to a ceasefire. We'll see how that goes.
But they're blasting the hell out of each other right now until midnight time over there. So
yeah, it's crazy. But I want to talk about the blockade. On top of the blockade that the United States supposedly is imposing. And this is going to have a real serious effect on China, as you know, because China gets so much of its oil and energy from the Persian Gulf. And the question is, well, what's China going to do?
And that's what is very frightening about it, because China is not going to be cowed by the United States. They're not going to submit to a U.S. blockade. They're not going to submit to having their ships seized or landed upon. There could be a military confrontation between China and the United States. China is not as dependent as some of the other countries. Japan gets 95% of its oil from the Gulf. You look at the situation in South Korea, India. These countries are more dependent. However, they have bigger reserve. They have big reserves. China has an even bigger reserve. So they planned ahead for this kind of contingency. But their supplies are dwindling. Their reserves are finite. And there's no knowing how long this could go on. I mean, Iran does not have to submit to U.S. pressure. And the U.S. has, 16 ships in the area, 10,000 troops on the ships. And 11 of those 16, I think, are destroyers. And each of the destroyers has helicopter capabilities, drone capabilities, radar capabilities. So they can stop pretty much all the shipping that goes to Iranian ports if they choose to do so. But the Iranians are in an extremely strong position. I mean, they have the U.S. by the short hairs right now, and they are not letting go. So they are really the ones calling the shots, and they are going to exact a significant price from from U.S. and Israel for an agreement here. And they're driving a hard bargain. They have their demands. One of them is stop the attacks on Iran's allies in the region, including Hezbollah. but they're going to extend that also to Hamas and Gaza. And clearly, the Israelis didn't want this. They didn't want to cease fire. They don't want to halt. The Israelis are, they're bloodthirsty. They want to turn parts of Tehran into Gaza. They're already doing it to parts of Beirut and other areas in Lebanon. We saw those nightmarish photos of Gaza reduced to rubble. Well, they're going to try to do the same thing elsewhere, except that they're under enormous pressure from Trump. Trump, who went into this thing stupidly, as you and I have discussed, is now under a lot of pressure in the United States and internationally to put an end to this, reopen the strait, give in to Iranian demands, and put an end to this, to walk away, declare victory, even though everybody is going to be an international laughingstock, because everybody knows that the U.S. is walking away with its tail between its legs and has been defeated in every sense. Yeah, we've blown up a lot of stuff. We can always blow things up. U.S. military can do that. It doesn't mean that the U.S. can get a favorable settlement that it can declare a win. So, but the pressure he's under. Okay, so I did an interview with a Russian outlet, and then I shared it with my friend James Carden. James is the head of the American Committee for U.S.-Russian Accord. He published the Renaissance News, a very important anti-war voice. And so I sent it to James so he could see it. He took it out, the questions that they asked, and he published it on his site as a statement from me. Then I shared it with my congressman, Jamie Raskin, who used to teach with me at American University, is a very distinguished law professor. And Jamie's, he ran the second impeachment trial against Trump, and he's the leading Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. Jamie then wrote back to me, great stuff, thanks. And then yesterday, Jamie introduced a bill into the legislature calling for the 25th Amendment, effectively, which is what my interview is about. Now, the 25th Amendment, if you get the vice president and the majority of the cabinet to say that the president is unable to fulfill the requirements of the office, then they can displace the president, put him out of. Now, not that J.D. Vance is better. I mean, J.D. Vance is almost equally bad, but J.D. Vance is not nearly as unhinged as is President Trump. I know you've followed it. Maybe some of your viewers haven't. But Trump, in the last week and a half, has shown that he's increasingly out of his mind. A week ago Sunday, he issued that report, open the fucking Strait of Hormuz, you crazy bastards, his tweet. Then Tuesday, he says that your whole civilization will die within 24 hours if you don't go along with us. He's threatening genocide. How do you kill a civilization that's been around for thousands of years in 24 hours? Only with the use of nuclear weapons. And so even threatening that is a war crime. But people were appalled. And then he picks a fight with the Pope. 55% of the Catholic voters voted for Trump. But then he lost the Latino Catholic vote with his ICE thugs in the streets and terrorizing Latinos. And now he's lost the white Catholic vote by picking a fight with the Pope. And then he posted these photos of himself as Jesus Christ. And of course, he lied after. He got so much pushback from the Republicans, from the MAGA people, from the evangelicals, the Christian zealots. And so then, then he said, oh, well, it wasn't intended to be that I was Jesus. I was just being a doctor healing. It looks like Jeffrey Epstein there. Nobody believes a word of it. and then he doubled down on it and again issued something like that yesterday. So, he was emotionally unstable and cognitively impaired weeks ago, but now he seems to be in the midst of a real meltdown. And the Iranians are not going along with. He says, "Oh, the Iranians called me up and they're desperate for a settlement." Right now they're refusing to even meet with the United States, and this could go on. We don't know. The U.S. could keep that blockade there. The Iranians could have their Houthi allies blockade the Red Sea. This whole thing is so the U.S. can either walk away defeated, or it can escalate, or I guess it could keep the status quo, but it's going to destroy any Republican chances in the midterms because it's Trump's voters who are getting hit the hardest by these gas prices and food prices and other energy prices and raw materials. The supply lines are completely messed up now. So I don't know, the world is just sort of being held hostage by a madman named Donald Trump and the support of Pete Hegseth, who's really Looney Tunes, and Rubio. I don't know if you see anything more positive going on right now, but it sure is not looking good.
Well, that was a great overview of where we've come from and where we're at. I want to drill down a little bit deeper on a number of things that you mentioned, but I want to add one more thing that, this blockade and what the United States is doing is not only having a significant impact on China, it's having a significant impact on Russia. And uh, I'm sure you're aware there's been all kinds of chatter out there that both China and Russia have prepared to intervene directly. And reportedly, they both have warned Israel, don't even think about using the weapons you have in your arsenal. And the same thing with Trump. But there's more in terms of what's happening in Russia that's related to this. Um, we've been getting news for the last 2 or 3 days that the several European countries, including Finland and some of the Baltics, supposedly are involved in manufacturing drones to send to Ukraine. And the Russian Foreign Ministry has said this makes you a participant in a war, a direct war with Russia. This will have consequences. So, where we have what's boiling over there in Iran, we have what's happening over here in this part of the world where the Europeans, NATO, and the United States has even now maybe a more limited hand in it, but they're still involved, threatening Russia again. And, they've supposedly captured at least one or two Russian tankers on the high seas. And so here we have, on top of what you're saying, another element that is so explosive, so dangerous. Now, I want to go back to a couple of things that you said. You used the word Trump being unhinged. I've been using that myself. I don't know, for the last several weeks actually, and I posted a video that I entitled "Non Compos Mentis." It's Latin for he's unhinged, he's lost it, he's crazy, and I really do think that he has lost it. I'm surprised that not many, or I don't think anybody in his cabinet are really ready to escape and jump ship. But as you mentioned, there's talk about invoking the 25th Amendment, which we'll have to see how that unfolds. But Peter, the thing that I think is so effective and so hilarious are all of these Lego cartoons that initially supposedly came from Iran, mocking Trump, and now there's other entities around the world that are producing these things. And to me, that indicates a couple of things. One, they realize that the most effective weapon against Trump is to mock him,
Yes,
to make a
exactly.
fool out of him.
Yes.
But
He
the
can't
second
stand
thing,
that. They can't stand that.
but I don't even know if he's aware of it. But the second thing that I wanted to mention about these cartoons, to me, it proves that the vast majority of the world is supporting Iran. They're producing they're
Yeah.
producing these their own versions of these Lego videos that are absolutely hilarious, but they are spot on. I mean, what are your thoughts, Peter, about these Lego cartoons and what they might be doing to Trump, if he's even aware of it, or even some people in his cabinet, but certainly worldwide?
I agree with you. The best weapon against a megalomaniacal, deranged narcissist like Trump is to mock him. His ego is so fragile that he can't stand this kind of derision. And the fact that they're doing it creatively, the fact that he's so isolated. I mean, who supports him on the world stage right now? Only Netanyahu, only the Israelis. His own base here is dwindling. By going after the Catholics, that's a big part of his base, the Catholic working class voters. And I agree with you. This is a great weapon to use. I remember that first march after he got elected in 2016. There was a huge women's march here in Washington, D.C., and everybody was chanting, "You're orange, you're gross, you lost the popular vote." But we've used that kind of mockery effectively in the past. Lyndon Johnson hated it. What were the two major things that we chanted at the Vietnam anti-war marches? One is, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" And the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
was, "Lyndon, pull out like your father should have." Right? And those, but the mockery, but it got to him. It drove him crazy. And I think, not only are Trump's enemies doing this, his wife threw him under the bus. When Melania
Oh,
goes on national TV and gives that Jeffrey Epstein comment, the one thing that the war was doing for Trump was it knocked Epstein off the front pages. Then she puts Epstein right back on the front pages, and nothing is going Trump's way right now, except he's making money. He's always making money. But other
so
than that,
Peter, uh, I want to get back to something else you said, and it's the only one that kind of in the world that is behind him is Bibi,
yeah.
Israel. My question to you is Donald Trump Bibi's bitch? Does Bibi own him? Talk to me about, and we're talking about the Epstein thing. When I say does Bibi own him, Netanyahu has said several times that the United States, and I'm going to paraphrase, they're easy to push over, they're easy to move, and they won't get in our way. And then he went on to say that with the influence that we have through IPAC, uh, we're basically in control of things. So now we have this
Yeah.
Epstein thing that's back in. Is this what you think that Bibi and Israel have on Donald Trump? Uh, is they've got some video of him, or they've got something that they're hanging over his head that they have so much control?
So you're suggesting that it wasn't the Russians who had the golden shower videos of Trump, it was the Israelis. Israeli intelligence is very, very good. The Mossad is very effective. Um, and Jeffrey Epstein was in bed with the Israeli intelligence and was tied to top Israeli officials and as well as other actors in Israel. Uh, so it would be plausible, but I don't have any evidence to suggest that. I mean, the way the Israelis have exercised influence in the United States has been through AIPAC, through funding. We know that Trump's biggest donor was Miriam Adelson, and she gave hundreds of millions of dollars apparently to Trump, probably more than Musk gave to Trump. Uh, so, it could be, you know, it could be possible that the Israelis have controlled Trump that way, or it could be possible that they just influence him through the money. Uh, I, I don't know. It's hard to know what motivates Trump. The New York Times came out with some reporting saying that a couple things, but the Israelis were in the Situation Room, that they had been in Mar-a-Lago before. Now they're in the Situation Room on February 10th or 11th, and were convincing Trump to go along with the war. And that the only one supposedly who stood up to Trump and told him not to do it was Vance. So that's why Trump has sent Vance out on several missions to humiliate him. Vance was there with Orban, who got slaughtered in the election. Vance was there for the failed negotiations in Islamabad. Vance gets rolled out to do the things that Trump knows are going to fail. So is that deliberate? I don't know what it is. It is valid speculation because clearly the Israelis were the ones, as I've said repeatedly, the Israelis have been trying to find an American president stupid enough, ignorant enough to go to war with Iran for more than 3 decades. And they finally found their man, Donald Trump. And this, from the American standpoint, is a disaster. He's blown things up, but he's achieved none of his other goals that he stated here. And now he's trying to end this. But he also has counter pressure on Bibi because they've got an election coming up in October. And the only place in the world where Trump's still popular is Israel. If Trump pulls the plug on Israel and on Bibi, then Bibi's going to get defeated in October, and he's going to be on trial and likely put in jail. So they need each other in a sense that nobody else. Starmer's speaking up to him. Macron. These namby-pamby, backboneless, spineless European leaders are standing up to Trump now. Carney, Trump, I think, is in a very, very compromised and weakened position, which makes him more desperate, which is why I'm so worried about what he might do.
Yeah, and I want to go back to something else you've mentioned in your overview. When he posted that poster of himself as Jesus, there was mockery and outrage across the spectrum, not just from Catholics or Christians, everybody.
Everybody.
Even Islam. They view Jesus as a prophet, somebody great in history, and you had atheists that were not religious at all or believers, but saying this was disgusting, it was sacrilegious. And then, if that wasn't enough, as you mentioned, a couple of days later, he takes on the Pope, and he says he's not a very smart guy. He's not good on crime. What does a Pope have to do on crime? It was like, it's like, this is beyond. You can't make this stuff up. And I hate to use that phrase, which everybody's using now, but you cannot make this stuff up.
No, because it's so self-destructive.
Yeah.
Why would somebody, doesn't he have Anybody who can stand up to him and tell him, during the first term in office, at least he had some people around him who would tell him, you're being an ass and this is illegal and immoral and don't do it. Now it seems like nobody stands up to him. There's no reality check on him. He's totally unfettered and unhinged. That's why, again, I keep saying anything is possible. I have my differences with the Pope. I'm an Orioles fan, and he's a Chicago White Sox fan, and the Orioles just swept the White Sox. So I, I was on one of these Indian TV
You're killing me.
I was on one of these Indian debate shows. I do a lot of them. They love them on Indian TV, and I'm up against these Republicans, these Trumpies who try to defend him. And with one of them, there was one thing that one of the two Republicans on that one, and I agreed on, and that was the Chicago White Sox. He's a Chicago Cubs fan, this guy. And nothing else we agreed on. But it's indicative to me to listen to the Indian TV hosts because they are so unsparing in their disdain for Trump. They used to at least try to be more neutral and moderate on this. Now they gush with bile. I mean, they can't find words powerful enough to express how much they hate Trump. And the Indians used to love Trump with the Howdy Modi stuff, and then Trump going to India, and those days are over. With the trade wars, with the tariffs, with the visa issues, with Trump claiming credit for ending the fighting between India and Pakistan, they share my feelings toward Trump.
So, continuing to talk about the Trump entourage, you are very knowledgeable about Russia, Russian politics, and is something that has been driving me crazy. Trump met with Putin in Alaska, and it was this kind of a love fest.
Yeah,
but the Russians,
the red carpet treatment.
Oh yeah. But when the negotiations started, Trump sent, and I want your opinion on this, Witkoff and his son-in-law Kushner, two big-time real estate developer shysters, to do the quote-unquote negotiations with Russia. Notably absent was Russia's number one.
Lavrov was absent.
Sergei Lavrov was never in those meetings. In Islamabad, he sends J.D. Vance, but to accompany, guess who? Witkoff and Kushner.
Yeah.
Peter, tell me your thoughts on what could be behind sending Witkoff and Kushner to all of these negotiations. This is something that baffles, well, it doesn't baffle me anymore. I think I know what it's about, but nobody's talking about it.
Well, part of what we saw with Kushner and his relation to Saudi Arabia, the Saudis effectively paid him $2 billion to do his previous round of negotiating. The thing about the Trump administration is they're the biggest grifters in American history. So on the one hand, you send over these real estate people to try to make a deal that's going to bribe the Trump administration, that's going to put more money. His meeting with Takaichi, when she came over to Washington, she talks about $150 billion or maybe $500 billion that Japan had promised to invest in the U.S. And she also says how handsome Barron is, and I know where he gets his good looks. And she says, Donald, you're the only one who can bring peace to the world. So it's the bribery, the flattery, the playing on his weak, fragile ego. It's a combination of them all. Now, he sends Kushner and Witkoff rather than anybody with any experience. when Obama negotiated the JCPOA, they were in discussions with the Iranians for 2 years, and there were scores and scores of nuclear experts. What the Omani foreign minister said, who was in the negotiations, he said Kushner and Witkoff did not even understand what the Iranians were proposing. They did not even understand it. And then they go back and tell Trump, well, they're not willing to deal. Let's go to the military option. So we're dealing with complete ignoramuses, but people who can do a deal when it comes to bribes for the United States. But they have no knowledge of history. They don't understand what's being offered. They have no technical knowledge, no understanding about the nuclear issues, really. And so it's just, there's no chance that they're going to resolve anything with Russia, resolve anything with Iran, resolve anything. But it's interesting, when he sent Vance over for that negotiation after it looked like he was going to start the bombing on a bigger scale and destroy their infrastructure, and then Iran was threatening to do the same throughout the Gulf. When Vance went there with Witkoff and Kushner, they brought a team of 300 people with them. So that looks like they were going to do some serious negotiating. And the Iranians brought about 70 people with them to Islamabad. So if we're going to do any real negotiating, that's what we're going to need. Technical experts, people who can deliver, and people who know what they're talking about. But the other problem in the U.S. is that the Trump regime gutted the State Department. They fired all the people who were competent. They replaced them with hacks, so they don't even have the expertise anymore. And the ones that Trump didn't and Rubio didn't get rid of, Musk got rid of with his Doge idiocy. So we don't even have competent people left to do this kind of negotiating. So you put up the show, you put up the facade that you're negotiating, you send the Laurel and Hardy of diplomats over there who know nothing about it, but they know something about stealing from tenants.
Yeah, you mentioned grifters, and it's about lining their own pockets.
Yeah.
And uh, the thing that was so disgusting is that Kushner apparently revealed plans to build, this high class resort in the Mediterranean on the bones of Palestinians. I mean, when that came out, I said, this is what these people are really all about. They're just talking about making money for themselves. And then, Peter,
I've got another theory, Regis. Maybe Trump wanted to get Kushner out of the way so he could finally date his daughter, Ivanka. That he said he wished he could date his daughter, right? Remember that sick thing that he said during the first term?
yeah.
And then there was that woman at the press conference, and he said, "Oh, I thought it was Ivanka. You look just like her," And I don't know, if that's really why he sent Kushner away. Maybe he was hoping he would get knocked off. I don't know what, but keeps the money in the family.
Well, the other thing, when we talk about being grifters, is Trump sets up himself as the chairman of the Peace Board.
Oh yeah,
and
for life.
And he for life, and he charges everybody who's going to be on his board $1 billion.
No, 2 billion, I think. Oh, maybe it was 1 billion. But I thought it might be 2 billion.
Whatever, it doesn't matter. He charged an enormous amount of money that was going to go into his pocket, not the United States Treasury, into his pocket. Nobody questioned, hardly anybody questioned this. And so when you put all of this together, and I'm looking at it always from the point of view of what the Russians are doing. Why has President Putin been so receptive of multiple trips from Kushner and Witkoff, absent Sergei Lavrov, the Russian diplomat? He doesn't have a peer anywhere else in the world right now.
Right.
Why does Putin put up with this? And the only conclusion I can come to is they're trying to tempt Russia through Putin with these big mega deals that's going to benefit Russia when it's over. But Kushner and Witkoff and BlackRock and all their buddies are going to be the ones owning the American side of, and I don't think Putin is going for it. But nevertheless, it gets back to this: they're grifters. They're not diplomats.
But there
And
was that idea, that Dmitriev had proposed about the bridge, from Alaska to Siberia, and that had some potential as an idea. Um, I don't know about the environmental impacts of it. That I'm not an expert on. But the idea that the U.S. and Russia could work together, if it were an honest kind of proposal, would be the wave of the future, something that we'd all like to see. And we know that some of the Europeans are much more open to working with Russia, and know how stupid they've behaved uh, throughout the Ukraine war, and now they're trying to prolong it. That's what I find most troubling about everything that the Europeans are doing of late. Is it's simply going to prolong the fighting, prolong the killing and dying and destruction in that war, uh, with no positive outcome that I can see at all. Uh, so, I mean, there are deals to be made that would be in Russia's interest and the United America's interest, but not this kind of grift. Not, you Lavrov, as you say, is a very distinguished and knowledgeable statesman. He should be involved in these things. But if you look at the statements that have come out of Lavrov, Peskov, Ryabkov, and even to some extent Putin, they have been so, it's clear to me, they see Trump as deranged. They fully get it, what Trump is threatening to do, and they've come out and denounced it repeatedly. They've also done a lot of outreach, as has the Chinese, Wang Yi and Xi Jinping. And what they're potentially going to come out of this is some kind of alliance between Russia, China, Iran, and other countries to take the world in a different direction. And that would be a great thing right now. The United States has lost stature, is no longer, not even pretends to be a moral force anywhere. It's just, it's the law of the jungle, and the U.S. thinks it's the king of the jungle. But the rest of the world sees that in many ways. If you stand up to a bully, then he folds, as Trump has folded now, and desperately wanting to get Iran to agree to any kind of deal that he can call a win. Uh, but I think that, he might go after low hanging fruit. He might go after Cuba next, because like Venezuela, but Cuba could resist more than Venezuela did. They've got a lot of troops. Russia's sending oil tankers there. The United States thought that it could simply, after it took the Marcoses from Venezuela, it could simply threaten and everybody would collapse. So it threatens Greenland, and it threatens Cuba, it threatens Canada and Colombia and Panama and Nigeria, but nobody is folding anymore like that. If the United States had that kind of military force or moral authority, it certainly doesn't have it now. And that's why, from an American standpoint of American hegemony, what's happening in Iran is an absolute disaster. Much like I think that what Russia did in Ukraine is a disaster for Russia. The kind of respect that people had for the Russian military before the invasion of Ukraine, has been squandered. The respect that people might have had for the U.S. military before the Iran war has been squandered. And maybe the world is better off without countries who can throw their weight around and do so militarily. I just think that the world is ready for diplomacy and new leadership and more enlightened leadership and leaders who speak for the planet, which is why the attack on the Pope is so idiotic, because the Pope is speaking for the planet when he says we need peace in Iran. when we need peace in Ukraine, when condemns the kidnapping of the Maduros. I mean, he's a moral voice, and that's what the world needs now. Somebody who speaks for the planet.
Yeah. And, something that has been happening the last 2 days, guess who is meeting in China with President Xi and the top diplomats? Sergei
Sanchez,
Lavrov. You have to wonder on
Abu
that
Dhabi,
level.
and Spain.
Yeah. And so uh, these two superpowers realize what's at stake.
That's
They
what I'm
both
counting.
of them are extraordinary diplomats, sophisticated, educated in history and in respect for dialogue. And so I think on this level, it says to me that Russia and China are obviously directly talking to each other. Putin, I
Yep.
understand, is maybe going to go to China. Trump is also talking about going to China, but we can talk about this. Trump already canceled a visit to China
Hmm.
when it didn't go the way he thought it was going to go in Iran, that he would be able to block China. And so he canceled it. But now I heard that he's planning to go there again. I
Yeah.
wonder if President Xi would even bother talking to him. But what do you see happening on that level, Peter?
I see again a cornered and boxed in Trump with very little recourse. The gas prices are up over $1 in the U.S. Somehow the stock market has bounced back in the United States, but Trump is just in such a weak position. He began this craziness with his war on the world economy, his tariff policy, which was most strikingly oriented to China and India, of all countries, and Brazil and some of the others. So he started the trade wars, and it didn't work, and especially didn't work with China because China had a stranglehold on the rare earth minerals and rare earth magnets, which could shut down U.S. industry effectively, including military. And so Trump caved in and started to make deals, but he needs to have a more enduring kind of economic detente with China, because China, it's like politically what's happening now with Iran. China holds more of the cards than the US does, but Trump has so little vision. He doesn't plan ahead, he doesn't think ahead, and he doesn't listen to advisors. You know how they do his president's daily brief? They start off with 2 minutes of video of things blowing up in Iran. That's the way to get his attention. He doesn't read, he doesn't have normal policy discussions. And his cabinet meetings, they go around the room and take turns saying how brilliant Trump is, and that he's the greatest American president ever. So they perform fellatio on him in public. But they're really pathetic spectacles that anybody who's watching, just can't believe that this kind of groveling and ritual self-abasement is going on. Uh, but that's the kind of person we're dealing with. And so I think the Chinese, as you say, see right through him. They know how to manipulate him. Putin knows how to play him. Uh, I don't know that they even need him anymore. That if you see their statements, they are condemning the United States as a fallen hegemon who can do no good in the world, but can threaten the world. And they realize that Trump still could end life on the planet. And that's the craziness. But they see that he's out of his mind. And the things he's doing are so irrational in their view that they are appropriately worried. Uh, they saw Nixon play the madman, but it was more of a pose. But with Trump, nobody knows if he's playing a madman or if he is a madman. And when you're dealing with access to nuclear weapons, you can't take a chance on trying to gamble that. because none of us really knows if he is as deluded as he appears to be. So, I mean, that's my big fear and concern.
Yeah, me too. Now, Peter, to conclude, I'm sitting here 6,000 miles away from home, the United States.
For good reason.
Well,
Although this is
yeah,
a beautiful time now in New England.
uh, there's several good reasons why I'm here. But we don't get any news of what's happening in the United States. The only news that I would get would be from two or three friends who are there, but I don't know if they're representative of what's happening across the United States. I don't think they are. They're longtime peace activists. They put their lives on the line. They get arrested. You know, our friend Bruce Gagnon is one of those people. Okay, but I have to ask you because I know you look at it from a different perspective. What is going on in the United States when all of this is happening around them? Are they totally oblivious to everything we've been talking about? Are they oblivious to what Trump is saying and doing? Everything you've talked about tonight. What is, are they delusional? Are they just depressed? Are they overwhelmed? What the hell is going on, Peter, in the United States
Well,
when
most
all of
people,
this?
yeah, most people, uh, you know, most Americans have very little knowledge of the world, and they get very little information. You know, one of the things that appalls me, this overwhelming opposition to the war with Iran, but I almost never hear it from a moral standpoint. Like people grumble about the price of oil, the price of gas, the price of food, this and that, and the other thing, airlines and vacations and mortgages. I almost never hear anybody talk about the moral outrage of what's going on. And to me, even more disturbing than the fact that people are so self-interested in a narrow, shallow way is the fact that they don't have this share my sense of the outrage over killing of children, killing of civilians, killing of soldiers. Like, the U.S. and Israel have destroyed every school, every university, and most of Iran, as the Israelis did in Gaza. To me, even more than all the tactical and other considerations, it's the morality of it that I find appalling. Maybe it's because I grew up with my moral uh, standard was the Holocaust. Before I was born, most of my relatives were killed in the Holocaust. And my earliest memories was of my grandmother around the kitchen table crying about all the relatives. And I grew up with this sense that whatever you do, uh, you could not be a good German. You cannot stay silent. You have to express outrage. So I became involved in the civil rights movement as a young teenager. And I got very involved in the anti-Vietnam War movement. And, but it has always been driven more by my own ethical standards than by the other pragmatic calculations. And that's what I don't see. Even in the criticism, I see very little of that. I've had some good discussions with my students of late, and because Tom Edsall had an interesting piece in the New York Times a couple of days ago about why the student generation is not out there protesting. Regis, when we were young, we were out there in the streets. We were protesting. We were throwing our bodies and putting our bodies on the line to try to stop Vietnam War from a moral standpoint as much as from every other standpoint. But that's not, I don't see that. And I don't see it with my students. And they've got various reasons because a lot of them do really care. Uh, and yet still they're not. And partly is a repressive atmosphere on the campuses. They equated anti-Israel protests over Gaza with anti-Semitism, and they've limited campus protests everywhere, which is appalling to me. And partly because when the students protest, they get doxxed, and their names and their information is out in the public. So the fascists are using different tactics that are having an impact on protests. But the overwhelming majority of Americans are horrified by this war, at least in terms of its impacts. So it's about a third of Americans support what Trump's doing, but that was before his fight with the Pope. That's waking a lot of people up. If you turn on American television, not Fox, but the other stations, they're interviewing all these Catholics around the country who say, I voted for Trump 3 times, but I never thought he was capable of going to war with the Pope and posting photos of himself as Jesus. So that has really gotten under the skin of a lot of people. And I think that when the new round of polling comes out, Trump's approval is going to be in the high 20s. But already it's the lowest at this point for any president at this point. And the Republicans know it's going to be a bloodbath for them in the Congress when the elections happen in November. And they could lose the Senate. They really could lose the Senate also. And that's what, not that the Democrats are good. I mean, some of the Democrats are wonderful. But if you look at these latest votes, I think 6 or 7 Democrats voted not to cut off military aid to Israel, and 11 Democrats voted not to cut off another part of the aid to Israel. So the Democrats are themselves a party with a lot of warmongers, and a lot of people are on the take from AIPAC, and a lot of people whose constituents, maybe they're they've got voters who support Israel. But some of them some of these Congress people are really guiltless. But at least if the Democrats take over, they will end the Iran war and hopefully do some other things worth doing.
You mentioned a couple of things: moral outrage and ethical standards. Both of us grew up during the Vietnam era,
Yeah.
and and over time we were exposed to My Lai, the massacre, and we later learned that this was not an isolated case; it was happening all too often. Uh, but during those days, the moral outrage we saw in the streets, and we saw it was Martin Luther King was out there marching, and there were marches everywhere, and there were Catholic priests, nuns, Protestant ministers, Jewish rabbis. I mean, the whole country
Yeah.
was morally outraged at what we were doing, and this is what I was glad to hear you talk about that today. There doesn't seem to be that expression of moral outrage with people in the streets, with people putting their bodies on the line, with students being out there, with college and university campuses where that was the hotbed of
Yeah.
protest and critical thinking, and so I was not happy to hear you say that, but um, it kind of answered the question that I've had on why the people in America have been so silent. Like you,
But Regis, there were 8 to 10 million people protesting at the last No Kings marches, and it's interesting because they say the main demographic is middle-aged women who were out there. There were a lot of men too, and there were some young people, but Edsel begins his article talking about the fact that there were so few young people out there. Why aren't the young people out there? What is this generation who lives on their phones? I mean, I'm seeing so many signs of that young people don't have social skills. They don't. they're having less sex, than our generation did. They don't interact with people. They watch porn on their phones and their computers, and they have sick relationship ideas, and they don't really have that human connection. And I think that's part of what's happening. And they, even though a lot of them have pretty radical ideas, and, and certainly are anti-war, they don't express it in the same way. And many of them bemoan the fact that there isn't that kind of campus activism, but it's not as if they say, okay, but I'm going to start it. When I was a freshman in, in college, I didn't think there was enough anti war activism on campus. So I started my own anti war group as a first semester freshman. It was a kind of chutzpah, that I thought I could do something like that. I knew I was in way over my head, but sometimes you have to provide that kind of leadership and stick your neck out and take a risk and take a chance to do the right thing. But I see my students having much more radical ideas in some ways than I had when I was their age, but I don't see them acting on it.
Well, Peter, I do think there is hope in more
There's
than
always
one
hope.
place.
There's always hope because we're still here, and whatever bad things we've done to the world, we could undo them. It's possible, as Kennedy said.
Well, the fact that you mentioned that Trump's popularity is probably going to descend into the 20th percentile, I don't think there's any president in our lifetime that's descended that low.
Do you
I
know
also think,
which president had the lowest approval ratings when,
who?
when he left office? It wasn't George W. Bush, Harry Truman.
Ah, Harry Truman.
Yeah.
Really, I didn't know that. We'll have to come back and talk about some of that history because that's right up your alley. But the other thing that I wanted to mention that I think is hopeful that the things are trending in a different direction is what's happening between Russia and China, especially, maybe even India, but a lot of those other countries that are either part of BRICS or from the third world who see the possible liberation from colonialism, from American history, colonialism and domination. And I see that as hopeful. And from where I sit, I can only hope that the forces of good, the forces of righteousness and morality will win out. And this is, I think, to me, Peter, the epic battle for the future order of the world.
Yeah. I mean, Regis, I agree with you totally. And, and I'm hopeful in my own strange way because, we can change it. It's possible to change it. And the worst Trump behaves in the name of the United States, the less power and influence that the United States is going to have. People talk about the Pax Americana, the last 81 years, and see it as a great period for humanity. It's not the way I see it, of course, and I know it's not the way you see it. It could have been great, but the United States has wanted to maintain its hegemony. We live in a world, George Kennan, who was the architect of the containment policy, the Cold War strategy, wrote that memo in 1948 where he said, we have 6.3% of the world's population, but we control 50% of the world's wealth. He said we can't help but be the object of envy and resentment. But the task ahead of us in the period to come is to maintain that position of disparity. And we're not going to do it with idealistic slogans. We're going to do it with cold, hard power concepts
Yeah,
and the use of
yeah,
force. And that's the world that we created. We live in a world now where the richest 6 people have more wealth than the poorest 4.5 billion people. This is not a world that any sane or morally decent person would want to create. And the US is desperately clinging to that kind of hegemony by force now, but there's no moral authority to go along with it at all. And the Europeans have also totally lost their way and are doing everything they can to prolong the war in Ukraine and fearful that if Russia gets a win in Ukraine, it's going to come after Europe next. I mean, this kind of crazy reasoning. And so they've consigned themselves to oblivion and the dustbin of history also by their militaristic backward thinking. And they just want to rebuild their arms. There was an article in Reuters today, one of Reuters' exclusives, about how weak militarily Britain has become. The fact that when some British asset was hit in, where was it? Um, Cyprus, I think, uh, that it took the Brits weeks before they were able to get a single ship there, long after France and Italy and everybody else had sent ships. But now they say Starmer is committed to rebuilding the British military. Just what the world needs is the British military to be rebuilt again, or any of the European militaries, rather than having an enlightened approach to peace. Or in the United States, this $1.5 trillion military budget that they're presenting on the Hill. They want to cut 10% from the social programs in order to fund this massive military buildup. Fortunately, most of the Democrats and some of the Republicans are opposing it. But this way that the world is thinking, the world has to be thinking in different terms. If we had peaceful relations between Iran, the United States, Israel, Russia, China, India, Pakistan, you know, we could cut our militaries and devote so much of that money to raising people's standards of living. What kind of world is that not the answer in? And what kind of world is more military spending the answer? I don't get it.
Peter, so good to be with you again. We can't let so much time elapse before we do it again because, as you mentioned in the beginning, things are getting crazier and crazier by the day.
By the day,
Peter,
by the hour sometimes.
thank you so much, Peter.
Take care, Regis. It's always great to see you.